this organization to invite me. I'm so glad to be here. And if you haven't already mocked me for my terrible Italian English pronunciation, after this afternoon you can do, I don't take offense. And in my head, I can speak good English, but then in the practice, so here we are. The title of my talk is maybe of the paper. J'ai fort médité autrefois sur cette matière. I have meditated a lot on this subject in the past. Philosophy and Money in Leibniz. In a letter written to Thomas Barnett on February 1700, referring to Isaac Newton's meditation on coinage, Leibniz confessed that he had reflected intensely and several times on this subject. I have meditated a lot on this subject in the past, showing that he was evidently aware of the debate, so much so that he could appreciate the reasons and issues mainly debated, and adding, I quote and translating the French and Latin of Leibniz. I approve our method at the Hearts and Minds, where, as you know, sir, we have fine silver coins minted for several 100,000 écus a year. I believe that the powers that have good intentions regarding coinage should agree on the same footing or on the same intrinsic goodness, and that the best thing could be to have them minted in full fineness. The smallest pieces of fine silver in our country are to grow. That is to say, the 18th part of a current écu. By agreeing on the same title, everyone would put an end to the banker's tricks, I underline this word, which are so ruinous to the population. Fine silver has the particularity that one can find a way to recognize it by sight instead of the other alloys which are subject to deception. I think that this small passage allows us to understand how much Leibniz was into the problem of money, which had involved between the 16th and the 17th centuries authors of the caliber of Copernicus and Newton, but also Jean Bodin and John Locke, just to give a few examples. Before getting into the heart of the topic, however, it is necessary to propose a prior analysis, which will be absolutely necessary to give structure to my talk. First of all, it is necessary to dwell on the main terms of the question, namely, what meaning the terms philosophy and money have in Leibniz. This very boring clarification, as I will try to show, allows to give a precise linearity to the whole of the discourse that follows. Here today, I avoid proposing the curious relationship between the man Leibniz and money in the terms in which it was represented by his secretary Eckhart, who described him as sordid. You can see that also in the book of Matthew Stewart quoted by Justin. In fact, by reading some passages of his correspondence, recalling the key passages of his life, everyone can recall how much Leibniz insisted with each employer on getting more and more money, negotiating his fees on every occasion and often demanding updates of his fee. What is philosophy? Probably one of the most pertinent motto capable of summarizing Leibnizian philosophy is theoria cum praxis. It seems rather arduous to propose a meaningful synthesis of the motto theoria cum praxis in Leibnizian work, since this would mean carrying out a complete recapitulation of it. However, it is useful to unfold its basic passages in order to frame the context within which his own reflection on coinage took place, recalling what Yvon Belaval had already noted, namely that the whole Leibnizian system has a monadological structure, rien de plus monadologique que ce système, translated, nothing more monadological than his system. The theory of the monad, in short, as Massimo Mugnai has noted on several occasions, is entirely central in Leibniz thought. And it should be noted that it is precisely the introduction of the concept of individual substance capable of overcoming the Aristotelian scholastic ontology and the excessively realist mechanist tendencies of the philosophy of the moderns in a perspective of harmony of traditions of thought with all the characteristics of that make the monadological option peculiar, that allows to transition to the study of politics and law. As a result of the monadological doctrine, the individual is affirmed there as an intellectual and appetitive substance in continuous progressive development, in the complexity and integrity of its tendencies from the sensible to the social and moral. The Leibnizian system leads to the elaboration of a political doctrine of reality and society through grounding in the metaphysics of substance, opening up the germination of original contributions in every sphere of human thought. Leibniz said, I translate, this system seems to link Plato with Democritus, Aristotle with Descartes, the scholastics with the moderns, theology and morality with reason. It seems to take the best of all things and reach farther than has been reached so far. The self-constitution of society, a concept that seems to recall the notion of spontaneity that Scott was talking about this morning, by means of pre-established harmony and the idea of law, of which the Elementa Iuris Naturalis offers an early testimony, lead to the overcoming of justnaturalistic doctrines such as Hobbesian. The comparison in a critical key with an author such as Hobbes, who also exerted an unquestionable influence on all Leibnizian production, can be read, for example, in a passage of the new essay of the human intellect, in which Leibniz observes, I'm very glad to see you far from the opinion of Mr. Hobbes, who did not admit that man was made for society. The sociality of every human being is stated receivably by Leibniz, who was sure that it spontaneously belongs to all individuals. The zone politikon of Aristotle. Gioele Solari, an Italian historian of juridical thought, regarding the harmony that is established between monads, each mirroring the universe from his point of view, observes that from this ideal meeting of spontanities of monads arises in Leibniz the idea of the unity of aggregates of substance, to which he alludes in the new essay, and to the idea of the reduction to unity of the plurality of individuals must refer the proposition of the monadology, le composés symbolisent avec les simples. The compounds accord with the simple. So for Leibniz, society too, like any compound, is not resolved purely and simply in individuals. It has its own unity and truth derived from it, as well as from individual simple substances that constitute it, because it is an adequate representation, or even better, an imitation, the analog, of the simple substances. Philosophy cannot abstract from the practical systems through which the expression of monads takes place, as are jurisprudence, politics, or economics, right from Boineburg's lessons in the years of his Maguntine apprenticeship. What Leibniz calls l'art d'inventer, the art of finding, of researching, that is his own philosophy, which stems from the need to separate certum ab incerto, inventum ab inveniendo, in the great store of warehouse or deposit without order and without inventory, to which human knowledge is equated, lacking a systematization that is able to derive its establishment, needs a philum meditandi capable of grounding it through the use of a method that is functional to its very unfolding in reality. here again is the image that Belaval proposed of the Leibnizian system having a monadological structure. And the method most useful to this combinatorial effort aimed to the elimination of incompossibilities can only be that of elements and conjectures of jurisprudence. It is at that point that the combination of theory and practice take place. In the Elementa Juris Naturalis, Leibniz describes the refinement that would result to man from the application of his method in these terms. I translate. It would be a bad condition, that of men, if their supreme good consisted in one thing that, in order to have it, it was necessary to wrest it from others. Rather, it must be held that the prerogative of true happiness is precisely this: to grow the more individuals are partakers of it. It will be seen in the conclusions that this talk that this observation underlines Leibniz's own economic thinking. Everyone can participate in the growth of true happiness, only in the harmony of a life of love and charity, in the grace of God, in a word, within the legality of a jurisprudence universelle, of a life culminating in the jus pietatis. The ultimate meaning of the motto Theoria cum praxi is precisely to allow the jus pietatis to come to fruition in the practice of daily life from its metaphysical foundation, to unfold down the most concrete aspects of existence, of which politics is a synthesis. What is money? The second question allows us to approach to the core of this conference, so I hope, namely, what is money and what is money according to Leibniz. In this sense, I would like to introduce a distinction between a subjective and an objective conception of money. This is my arbitrary partition, so you can also challenge me. In the first sense, money is relevant as metal, that is, in its numismatic meaning, while in the second sense, it is relevant as an emblem of the economic system. So, money in its subjective conception. Using the distinction also used by Max Weber in example, evidently tributary to his studies in economic history, money is both a prescribed means of payment and a general means of exchange. Money, in the subjective sense, is precisely the prescribed means of payment. In its definition, we find the various issues dealt by Leibniz on the subject of money, namely its numismatic significance and likewise the aspect of money as metal. Again, we distinguish two issues. Leibniz's interest in numismatic aspect is derived from various elements. I will tell you some. From 1690 and 1695, Leibniz had an epistolary relationship, 16 letters, with Niccolò Bon, an expert of ancient numismatics. In times that saw the flourishing in Venice of antiquarian collecting and trade and the formation of notable private medal shops, such as the conspicuous collections of Girolamo Correre and Pietro Morosini, whose reorganization and arrangement were due precisely to Niccolò Bon's activity. Leibniz resorted to him for information and retrieval on numismatic material. It is interesting and at the same time noteworthy that Bon never published anything, despite the expectation of his erudite correspondence. But the manuscript of the Index of Medals had been sent to Leibniz himself and is in fact now preserved in the Niedersächsische Landsbibliothek in Hanover. 2. Another very important correspondence for understanding Leibniz's interest in numismatics is his correspondence with Carl Gustav Heraeus, a Swedish numismatist as librarian and collector of coins, catalogued in Thesaurus ex Thesauro Palatinus Electus, to whom Friedrich I of Prussia entrusted the custody of his coin collection. Leibniz had, moreover, already come into contact with Schott. I am skipping. Probably with some requests for books and presumably some remarks of the text of Exachiel von Spanheim, Dissertationes de Prestantia et Usu Numismatum Antiquorum, whose secretary Schott was, moreover, and with whom Leibniz was also in correspondence. These correspondences, of course, many more could be identified, but these seem quite significant, give insight into Leibniz's interest in numismatics. But the interest in numismatics was not an end in itself. As one of the many reasons for which Leibniz is known is his interest in how silver was mined in the Harz mines. The Harz is a mountain range in the northern Germany, located southeast of Hanover, where rich silver deposits were discovered around the year 1000, starting in the town of Goslar and then in the Rammelsberg mines. Many of you will probably know Goslar more because of the delicious beer than the history of his mines. The salt beer is very famous. Between a period from 1661 and 1720, the amount of silver extracted in those mines covered between 41 and 53% of the entire German production. From the fall of 1678 onward, in fact, Leibniz became so passionate about the Harz project because he saw it as a way to generate a continuous revenue stream capable of financing what was the core of his perennial project to reform the entire Encyclopedia of Science, the development of Characteristica Universalis. Such a bold cultural and political project, as we know, was beyond the capabilities of even the most gifted intellectual individual like himself, and could only be successfully pursued collaboratively. The organization of this collective effort would have required the establishment of a cultural foundation, which in turn could sustain itself only through a generous and steady source of funding. We must remember that in order to obtain funding of his research, Leibniz had ever considered growing tobacco in Hanover. If his principal employer, although sympathetically supportive of the project in principle, could not or would not grant the funds required for his speculative and philanthropic project, the best hope Leibniz could conceive of for obtaining the necessary funding was to tap into the greatest economic resources, not only of the Duke of Hanover, but of the wealth dynasty as a whole, the continuous flow of silver and other metals from the mines of the Harz. From this point of view, the daunting technical problems with which the miners had to contend represented an unmissable opportunity for Leibniz. In this sense, we have to imagine that Leibniz himself was aware of the movement of precious metals from the Americas to China that David Graeber discusses in his book, so much so that he set his sights on German silver to mint new coins, I think. The problem Leibniz was confronted with was that because of the system of draining the water that seeped into the mines, in drought years, production decreased dramatically by up to 50%, since the water pumps did not have enough power to keep the water away from the deposits. So he decided to devise a drainage system in which the water pumps would be driven using wind power rather than hydraulic power. We can find some elements of this interest in the Protogean. Of course, the project did not go well, and it was suspended in 1685. But it is important to us here, beyond the discussion of the goodness of the Leibnizian idea of using windmills for the moving of the pumps that were to drain the water, to recall its central point, which is that, as stated in the letter to Barnett quoted at the beginning, Leibniz was convinced that a coin minted with good silver would be more valuable in an absolute and also in a relative sense than one minted with a less fine alloy. Evidently, in this, Leibniz stood in sharp contrast to, for example, Jean Bodin, who, on the other hand, in the second half of the 16th century, in response to Malestroit, had precisely hypothesized, introducing what would later become known as the quantitative theory of money, that more precious metals, gold and silver, would increase inflation, since in the face of greater inflow of money, there would not be a similar increase in goods. In particular, in 1566, Malestroit, an advisor to the king of the president of the French Public Accounts Commission, conducted an inquiry into widespread price inflation and the diminishing value of money. He defended the concept that inflation was a mere illusion, the precious metal content of coins, and so their value had diminished, but the food prices in terms of precious metals had not increased for Malestroit. In 1568, Jean Bodin responded that prices inflation had mainly been driven by the massive inflows of precious metals to Europe since the discovery of gold and silver mines in South America. So, but I skip some parts of my talk, so I go more fast. Okay. As I would like to show, all the questions could be circumvented precisely, the questions about the inflation, the problems between Malestroit and Bodin, could be circumvented precisely through what can be called Leibniz economic theory. It must be said, in fact, that in the face of a discussion that can be made part of the history of the mercantilist doctrine, and in which Copernicus and the Salamanca school, in the person of Martin de Azpilicueta, Luis de Alcalá, and Luis de Molina, took part among the first, Leibniz's point of view is, in my opinion, completely different, and the only way to demonstrate this will be to turn to the last part of this talk. In conclusion, I would like to turn to the analysis of the political and economic system that Leibniz had in his mind. In order to understand the relevance of this last effort I am asking to you to make, to follow my talk, we must recall the reason why Bodin was convinced that more precious metals would increase inflation. I quote Bodin. As the quantity of money in circulation increases without a comparable increase in the supply of goods, prices tend to react upward. This is, we are faced with a line of reasoning that I think could be explained in these terms. There is an increase in the amount of gold and silver, so there are more coins in circulation. So prices rise because there is not enough demand for goods from the population, because the population has not purchasing power. That is, in essence, all the money in circulation is not owned by the population, which has become impoverished for all the reasons of the crisis that talk also Justin. This is where the specificity of Leibniz's viewpoint comes in. There would be many texts that could be considered to make his point of view clearer. In particular, I have chosen two. The first is entitled Societät und Wirtschaft, probably written in 1671. In this fragment, Leibniz seems almost to be the forerunner of a state socialism, and he seems almost to preempt the doctrines of Owen and Fourier by talking about a manufacturing controlled monopolistically by the state. We read from Leibniz. The company will be protected by a monopoly, since it will in every case give goods at a good price, indeed far lower by having the manufactured goods that now have to be imported. And thus it will avoid above all the monopoly of merchants and this is new word of Leibniz, polypoly of artisans. That is excessive wealth of the former and excessive poverty of the latter. In continuing. And why should so many people live in misery for the benefit of a few others? The general purpose of this society is therefore to redeem the worker from his misery. The peasant does not need it, for him bread is assured. The others either do not serve no purpose or serve the government. Moreover, this society can free the peasant from all worries too, by buying their products at a fair price in any case, whether low or high. With this, they can also avoid excessive rises, since the society can own a common granary. And in another text published in the late 19th century by Onno Klopp, we read further. Now, it is far better to prevent poverty and misery, the mothers of crimes, than to soothe it after it is arisen. Therefore, there is no foundation of churches or even of almshouses worth the planting of well-organized establishments of production, by which men become truly more virtuous in themselves and more useful to the others. This never fails to happen when you make them industrious, and therefore at the same time content with the success and good fruits of their labor. In this way, moreover, one puts youth in the path of order in good time, constituting for the state a nursery of better and better citizens. Thus the generation get better and better, as in the cultivation of flowers. The state, for Leibniz, must make itself the promoter of the wealth of its citizens. Each state on its own, exploiting its own natural resources and the natural inclination of its people. The state must abolish misery and promote the labor of all citizens. Leibniz was thinking of setting up for his proposal a kind of permanent commission. Today in Italy, we would say a government of technicians, or as it was until a few months ago, a technical advisory committee. That now it doesn't exist. Based in the capital and able to link up with all provinces in a quasi-federalist view. I quote, "The purpose of this council should be not only that which concerns manufactures and trade, but still agriculture, the draining of useless swamps, the reclamation of lands, the cultivation of medicinal plants, fruits, herbs, trees, and other plants suitable for the feeding of men and of animals, building, painting, and other practical arts, the research, analysis, and purification of minerals, metals, salts, and other such matters, the propagation of animals useful to men in the most appropriate way for them to be utilized, the preservation of the health of people by means of suitable measures, especially with regards to epidemic diseases." This makes me laugh. And a host of other government affairs, but especially the education of youth, insofar as it is which is intended to make the youth industrious and industrious, leaving out the care of the public school, which is the responsibility of the consistors. Finally, it should still care of crafts, sciences, studies, and experiences, and all those things that concern not theology or the academic faculties of the university, but the practice of the useful arts, theoria cum praxis, which provide comfort and ornament to the common life. Indeed, since these arts and science give the rules that direct the workmanship of artisans, it is evident that the separation of theory from practice renders science sterile and execution imperfect execution. This economic system, about which I cannot do too much, alas, provides as its ultimate goal precisely the achievement of goodness and benevolencia. Indeed, benevolencia is precisely one of the watchwords by which and through which such a system can be constructed by a ruler who must interpret law precisely as the charity of the wise. But Leibniz goes further. This economic system, in spite of the protectionism that characterizes it, and which I do not know how it fits in with the other aspects of his economic doctrine, mainly because I'm not an economist, but I would like to think about it before I hand my paper, as to be placed in an international context. Here, in a sense, as Enrico Pasini, a very important Leibniz scholar, noted, if Kant is the philosopher of cosmopolitanism, Leibniz is the philosopher of internationalism. In internationalism that, in some respect, seems to prefigure the need for a confederation of European states. And this is a theme I am working on, that should establish a series of relationships among themselves that André Robinet defined through the image of La Balance de l'Europe, to whose theme I devoted my last book last year. Europe must confederate itself, but not in the self of Abbé de Saint-Pierre, and we would say not even in the sense of Kant, but through a series of measures, not only legal, but political, cultural, and not least economic, that will enable to live in peace. In this light, we must read the proposal that Leibniz made in response to the Abbé de Saint-Pierre when, on August 4th, 1715, after reading his work on perpetual peace, he argued that the execution of the project for a perpetual peace should be able to rely on a European bank, a kind of European central bank that would act as a guarantee for deposits in order to avoid too high interest rates and thus worse. Even currency, the minting in particular, is subject to divine and human jurisprudence, in the sense that currency too becomes part of the Leibnizian system that envisaged, in contrast also to the Renic proposals of the Abbé de Saint-Pierre, a European peace based not only on treaties, which continue to prolong the terrible situation described by Hobbes in Leviathan, of states standing against each other in the position and in the condition of gladiators ready to attack, but on a series of measures aimed to improving the living conditions of the population. Here we see Leibniz's enormous design at work, what allows us to be able to speak of a real philosophical and political system that had as its sole purpose the peace and prosperity of the population, not of the rich, not of the powerful, not of the bankers, against whom Leibniz's critics went, and against whom Leibniz has elaborated his idea of the silver standard, which was supported to consist of the establishment of central banks in each country connected to a mint that was supposed to mint money, giving it by the value chosen by the sovereign, since politics and economics were to be two sides of the same coin. Politics must be theoria and economics must be praxis. This would have allowed the creation of a kind of European monetary union aimed at avoiding currency devaluations and also at avoiding the overpowering of bankers, since the economy had to be subject to politics anyway. All this would have been impossible without a good science of administration, capable of coordinating Leibniz's entire program, based on the teaching of Veit von Seckendorf, who wrote the first book on the science of administration, the Deutscher Fürstenstaat. I think, moreover, that Leibniz was the first to call for a new political science to make Europe work, even before Novalis referred for a new language for a Christian new Europe. In practice, his thinking on currency, on money, better on money, also fit into a political design that we can define as quasi-federalist in order in which had as its only reference, as already mentioned, peace. A peace that could only be achieved through a multiplicity of political measures that would produce the balance de l'Europe, as noted perhaps first by André Robinet in his beautiful book. These were material and cultural factors, control of money, of currency, along with the rational management of agribusiness, mining, manufacturing, trade and communication, and taxi were part of the material factors, while, on the other hand, the idea of a universal republic of letters was the center of the cultural factors of peace. In this sense, Leibniz thought of a necessary dialogue between scholars from all over the world, united in national academies in order to produce a broad scientific and technological progress that would drive the economy and also improve the situation of the population. Leibniz's interest in the discovery of the pressure cooker, which was to be made available to German citizens to improve their diet and make food less heavy, thus relieving the national health system himself proposed along with compulsory insurance for all workers, is unforgettable in my opinion. So I think I could finish my relation. Thanks. And sorry for my terrible pronunciation.
About half an hour for discussion and questions.
I have 3 items. May I go?
Yeah. And you take it up with Fabio.
Well, actually, 2 of them I can go both Fabio and Justin. This is totally out of ignorance. 2 of my questions have to do with the grounding of these ideas, of this modeling of the economic dynamics in the metaphysical system. And I'm looking for kind of a mediating connection that would be specific to criminal. And one has to do with mining and metal. And I was wondering whether he left any writings about mining and metal that had the tone of the perspective of theory of matter, whether from a natural philosophical point of view or a metaphysical point of view, that provided a more specific connection to the metaphysical side. The other issue is whether he talked about the state control model of economy in terms of the pre or post-established harmony.
Okay, a great question. So, mining and metal writings. You know that Leibniz had a great problem. He needed to write all the day, and so he wrote 1 million, probably more than 1 million of manuscripts. You can find some reflections, some meditation about mining in Protogea. That is a writing of 1691. Just a few reflections about this problem. And you can, if you want, I can write you an email. You can find some reflections in his correspondence. because he was very passionate about this problem, and so he went so often to Hearts, then he returned to Hanover, then he returned to Hearts, then to Hanover. He had problems with miners because they didn't want this new invention of Leibniz. He had problem with Friedrich First. He had problems with all his employers with his idea of new draining of water. Some authors said that probably looking at the project, because Leibniz also designed the project, you can find in some manuscript the images of this project, because he loved too much to images, sketches. Some authors said that probably from an engineeristic point of view, this machinery would be would work. I don't know, but he was very convinced it was the goal of his studies of engineer. What is the relationship between mining, metal, and metaphysics? Okay, in Leibniz, all have relationship with metaphysics. I love to think about a phrase that Leibniz used to explain, talking about his monadological system, because in my opinion the perspective of monadological system, I write you the quoting of Yvonne Belaval that is very great. Sorry, before I say that, just a moment. Okay, nothing more monadological than his system. All points of view respond to it. The least sentence seems to express it entirely. No doctrine imposes more the feeling of unity. In none is the focus of this unity more elusive. From whatever point of view one places oneself, the text immediately converges. Just to explain, Belaval is very good in this definition. I like to think about a quote that Leibniz loved to use, that is tout est comme ici in French. All is like here. That he quoted from a theater drama that was called Arlequin dans la Lune. I don't know how to translate Arlequin. Carnival mask with so much colors. Harlequin on the moon. Harlequin on the moon. I think that, but not only me. I think that this phrase, this quotation, tout est comme ici, so to say, in every part of the solar system, in every part of my monadology, in every part of my system, in every part of my metaphysics or my philosophy, all is equal. And so when you think about this probable solution, you can find that almost mining and metal writings are connected with metaphysics, because the money he wanted to fund from mining and metals, he wanted to spend in his project of Characteristica Universalis, Academia of Science, and etc. and etc. The state control. The answer was
the connection to pre-established or post-established harmony.
Okay. It's a great. Okay, yes, I remember. These passages on the state control are two fragments. Very little fragments. You know that we scholars of Leibniz are useful with the fragments that also Leibniz could with the knee and piece in another part of paper with manuscripts that went. So confusion. This fragment is extrapolated.
The combinatorial approach.
Yes. Okay. Yes, combinatorial approach. These fragments is extrapolated from we don't know from what, but I think that yes, there is absolutely a connection between this problem of state control and harmonia universalis. And also pre-established harmony. State that controls is the pre-established harmony. Give the pre-established harmony and gives the pre-established harmony of politics and of policies. This is maybe the great idea, I think, is the great idea of this author. I don't know if okay, thank you.
Reading this correctly, Justin has a question. He's raised his hand. Do I have to do anything? Justin,
Yeah.
You have been hereby recognized. I did it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, it's a bit hard for me sometimes to discern what's going on in the audience. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk quite a bit, and I have tons of questions. Maybe just to begin, I really appreciated the reference to the Denis Papin pressure cooker towards the end. And you probably know as well the satirical text that Leibniz wrote, the petition of the dogs that were supposedly protesting against the introduction of the pressure cooker into the kitchens of Wolfenbüttel, because this would take the bones away from them. And he had a whole kind of imagined hierarchy of positions of various dogs at the court. It's a really delirious text. One of the rare instances where Leibniz is trying to be overtly humorous. Very interesting. Anyhow, I have a couple of questions. I could go on and on. That you gave so much to latch on to in your talk. One is about something I'd never really thought about before, but regarding the failed mining project. It's interesting to note, and I'm sure you know about this, that Leibniz would later seek to make money from another project for which he gained the patent in Prussia, which he hoped to use to raise the funds for the St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences, which was silk production, the silk industry. And he learned everything there was to know about silkworms and was very active in this. And this as well placed Prussia in a special position vis-a-vis China, which up until the late 17th century had cornered the market, right? So silk was Chinese. And so it interested me, and something I'd never really thought about before. Maybe a first question is, what is, you mentioned just in passing, Leibniz's reflections on the global economy that had made silver so desirable, including China's role in the global trade of silver from the Americas. So this just made me think about the kind of across Leibniz's life, the shift from silver to silk, so to speak, and whether there are continuities there. So that's one thing. And another is regarding the notion of government by technicians, you didn't use the term cameralism or Polizeiwissenschaft, and these terms that are most familiar from Andre Wakefield's work. And in Andre Wakefield, what really becomes clear is something you did highlight, which is the connection of the mineralogical endeavors to the ideas of government by technicians. So I was wondering if here you had cameralism in mind, and I have further questions about the Proto-Gaia and other texts, but I think I'll leave you with two for now.
Okay, about silk industry and the role of China. I think that if I would speak about all the projects of Leibniz, we would be here until this night. I would like to propose to you that are a scholar of Leibniz, an image that I like so much, imagining the same project, that the same Leibniz as an inventor, as a man who had so much projects. And this is the image. I think, but this is a sketch that I propose you. I think about the work of Raspe, the librarian of Hanover, that is Munchausen Adventures. I don't know if you have read the Munchausen Adventures.
Sure.
I think sometimes that Munchausen with his strange adventures is Leibniz with his strange adventures. The fact is that Raspe was the first man that went to the library of Leibniz, and when he went to this library, he said, "Wow, what's that things?" And there was manuscripts that no one had moved in 40 years, if I remember, 35, 40 years. And it was the first man that collected some manuscripts of Leibniz. The first collection of Leibniz, the first Leibniz edition, if you want, the archaeology of Leibniz edition begins with Raspe, that was the author of the Munchausen, and also the author of some strange experience in his life. He wrote so much about these adventures, but in some way, I think that all these strange projects of Leibniz, we can say that they were so weird, so strange, these projects. I think that they were strange as Munchausen Adventures, the silk adventures, the pressure cooker adventures, the phosphorus adventures, the cell of libraries adventures, and so the mine adventures. I think so, if I can say that. When I talked about China, maybe I have said something more, but I don't think that Leibniz could think about the role of China in buying and selling, like David Graeber say in his work, the gold and silver from the Americas. I think that, but I think that Leibniz saw in perspective the important role of China. If you think Leibniz was the first sinologist when he met Padre Grimaldi in his Italian voyage, he was very interested about Chinese language, Chinese alphabet, because he thought that this alphabet could be compared with his studies on characteristic universalis. And so a new alphabet for the science, a new alphabet for the development of science, as you know. And so I think just that Leibniz could see that in perspective. He saw that China was an important partnership for Europe, and that it was necessary to have a relationship with China. China was very important, and the cultural heritage of China was important too. And so Europe needed to have connection with China. He also said that the natural theology of China was the same of our natural theology, not the rational theology, but the natural theology was the same. And so we could appreciate this theology, and we could agree with China too. So I think just this for the China role in Leibniz perspective.
Yeah.
And from the government of technicians, I think that Leibniz had in his mind a different thought about the role of technicians. I am working a little bit about this problem because I think that is very important. If you read some works of Leibniz, now I haven't translated it this afternoon, but we can talk about it, like the methodology of juridical science to teach and apprehend juridical science. You can see that in the last part, Leibniz hoped that a new class of jurists and politicians could arise with his method of juridical approach. And he thought that this new class of jurists and politicians will have the hegemony on politics. And so I think that he thought about, he prefigured this term of hegemony. I think at the term like Popper thought, like Antonio Gramsci thought about hegemony. And I think that that Leibniz could think about this theory of hegemony. This is why I think an Italian author like Eugenio Colorni uses so much Leibniz to explain his point of view in the European former union. In Ventotene Manifesto, you can read some parts that probably had been written by Eugenio Colorni, in which you can see this element of hegemony at work in the opinion, in the Leibnizian opinion of Eugenio Colorni. There must be an hegemony in Europe from a class, and now it is so Europe, a class that is the counterpart of the population. And I think that Leibniz thought this kind of role of the technicians. I don't know if we can compare this to the cameralism. Almost, I think that there are some convergences. Probably because Leibniz and the Cameralists studied on the same test, that is White von Seckendorf, Teutsch, Fürstenstadt. I think that must be something like this.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That sounds very reasonable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably have time for just another question or two.
Just a couple of things. Actually, the first one goes to Justin. Justin, sorry, it's Jordi again.
Oh yeah, hey.
I just heard. I read recently that Lawrence Hooke development of microscopy in the Netherlands was linked to the silk and fabric trade. because it had to do, he was involved in quality control of the fabric, and that required high precision observation.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the thing I was going to mention earlier also had to do with the fact that you mentioned funding as key to the story, and that is something I mentioned in my talk. And that I think it's another dimension of the relation between money and philosophy.
Yes, funding, the fundraising, yes, need so much.
If I could sneak in one last question, I'm just sneaking this in, it's a Rosini question, but I'll put it this way. If you read Leibniz, as you described, he wrote thousands and thousands of pages. If you had just selected his views on money and finance, that's all you read. Is there anything in there that would suggest the outlines of his wider metaphysical views? Like, so, would you see traces of his wider philosophical ambitions or not?
I think that that's what we said with Jordi, that the problem of the harmony of the opposites, the pre-established harmony returns everywhere in Leibniz, like some others motto, like others fundaments, metaphysical fundaments of his thought. And I think, yes, that also his economic view, also his political view, also his juridical view, and scientific view are constellated by this metaphysical fundament. Maybe, as Jordi noted, the pre-established harmony is one of the most important things. Also, the problem of the relationship between theoria and the praxis. Also, the problem of the principles of reason. I think I can see that